Well, a couple of housekeeping chores as we do this very quickly and get started this evening. Number one, if you have an interest in bringing food for Louise Brown's funeral, please contact Carrie Evink. In case you don't know who Carrie Evink is, I've just learned that last name myself. So it's spelled just the way it sounds, Evink. I don't know, I just decided to do that. So in other words, if you can bring food, talk to Carrie. Kerry, not Cary, not, anyway. That was simple. The other thing I want to do is publicly thank Mitch and Blake. They talked me off the wall on Wednesday. I mean, I was on the wall. It was a short wall, and I was only about 2 feet high, but I was on the wall ready to jump because I was really nervous about the Lord's table this morning. The idea of who goes where, when, those basic things don't bother some people. They go, I'll go with the flow. For me, I have to know each step. And as I get older, some of you may understand this, and I'm really having this, if it's out of the ordinary, I panic. And I did that on Wednesday night. And they were able to talk me down and handle it really well. I really appreciate that. It wasn't, hey, get over it. That, and that kind of attitude. So I do appreciate that. We're looking at the good man had to die, the consequences of sin. We said we wanted to better understand the power of sin so that we're able to give those who don't understand why they should obey or why they should follow Christ a reason to understand. And we want to be able to clearly and simply explain to those and to ourselves what sin is, its effects on each of us and the world, and why only divine help could set us free. One of the things I want us to kind of do, this is actually a class not really set up to introduce people who don't know anything about the Bible to the Bible. It's more of those who have had you can learn from that, but for those that have a background that kind of go, I need to know a little bit more. I don't feel comfortable teaching. Well, one reason a person doesn't feel comfortable teaching is understandable because they don't like standing in front of people talking to them. Okay, that's understandable. The second reason is one that simply that if you don't know anything, it's really hard to open your mouth and say the right thing. It's kind of like, just getting really lucky. But this doesn't mean we have to know everything. There's always a struggle in a congregation as to when a person should teach. And I just will tell you, I believe that teaching is an authoritative position in the church in the sense that a person needs to know more than what they're teaching. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get started, but you have to pick and choose what you're doing there. And the second thing is, and I wish that people that are going to teach would understand this, you don't have to teach everything that you know. Professional teachers learn that, and it becomes ingrained. But the new people who are, for the first time they get up, they study for 47,000 hours, and they have 30 minutes to try to present things, and they try to present everything in 30 minutes. And what it comes out is a frustration on their part because they can't get everything, a frustration on the listener's part because they're looking and going, what's happening? The people are speaking too fast, and that's what's going to happen tonight, as a matter of fact, because I'm going to be covering a lot of material. And finally, we're helping others. It's not a position of authority in the sense that it gives you some kind of prestige. Men, I'm commentarying now, I made up a word, maybe. Our culture says, men, if you're not standing up in front, you're nothing. If you're not doing something, you're nothing. That's not the way the church works. You do something at home. You do something with your friends, teaching the word. You don't have to stand up in front to say, well, now I'm a member of the Church of Christ. Now I'm a Christian because I've stood in front of people. That is something I think that people need to look at very closely as to why we actually do that. Teaching is for us, but not from us. Last week we talked about choices. This week I actually printed this out so I don't have to keep turning my back on you and walking, although I will walk up and down. Poor Kenny, he said, now the camera only has so much angle. I handled it in my wise, methodical way. I don't care. I wonder. I can't help it. And so, here's what we covered on choices. Adam and Eve received an open invitation, this is what we looked at last week, to anything in the garden with only one restriction, and we remember that. Adam was the first to hear of this in Genesis, the 2nd chapter. I would encourage you to open your Bible to Genesis, the 2, 3, and 4. Those are the chapters that we're really going to be looking at this evening. And follow along, because I'm going to be covering material, but I'm not going to be reading the scripture. I'm going to ask you to read the scripture while looking and making sure that what I'm saying kind of matches that. He apparently tells Eve, because Eve seems to know about it later. God, the serpent implied, was looking not only for himself. This is the gist of this message. Eve responded in a way that most of us do. She responded not by defending God, but by emphasizing the consequences of what would happen. She didn't say, well, you tell me this, but you ask about what I can't eat. Here's what God allowed me to eat. Here is all of the things that he allowed me to have. We don't do that. We go right to well, if I do this, God will kill me. If you start from that premise and you're teaching to others, and then you're telling them that you're teaching from a premise of grace and love, they're going to look at you and go, really? Adam is apparently listening and says nothing. In Genesis, the 3rd chapter, in verses 1 through 6, if you'll take a look there and read that silently as I read my little commentary, Eve believed that God had lied to them. This is how I read and understand this passage. Eve believed that God had lied. Why do you say that? Because the way it's phrased, he didn't want to share the glory and honor which should also be rightfully theirs. Eating the fruit, this is the key on this, eating the fruit, the serpent deceitfully said, would give them the same authority as God. Why do you need a God if you are going to be the God? When people tell us the world has changed, doesn't this sound like today? And it's been the same theme throughout our history, isn't it? Who is going to be God? We are, or God will be? Eve decides that the serpent had made a reasonable argument. She believed she had the wisdom to weigh the argument and determine the truth. I want you to think about this because it applies to us today. For those of you that love putting your time and effort into proving scriptural terms by scientific means, this is exactly what Eve does. This is exactly what Eve does. She decided that it sounded reasonable. Is the argument reasonable? She believed she had the wisdom to weigh the argument and determine the worth. If she could think about it, then she could decide her own future. As you read those passages, she used her physical senses to note that the fruit appeared edible. First of all, she sees, she reasons, she hypothesizes. It's attractive. She finds herself wanting it. She handles the fruit. Here's our experiment. Because after all, what happens if she touches the fruit? Supposedly she dies. Wait a minute, who said that? She did. Well, Eve did. Yeah, Eve said it, and now she's come to believe it. because she touches the fruit. She didn't die. Notice that's how the passage is phrased. She didn't die. So what is she doing? She's taking her logical argument, she's taking her hypothesis, and she's building it, and then she's saying, look, I can do this. It's working out. She eats the fruit and gives some to Adam to eat. Adam is silent, and he eats the fruit. Who did Eve rely on? Herself. Her reasoning ability. This wasn't just an emotional thing, was it? If it was an emotional thing, we wouldn't have had all those passages, those couple of verses in there explaining, you saw this, this, and this, and this. No, it's taking it step by step, and she's thinking it through. There, I guess I better turn the page, huh? God allows the couple time to reveal to him their choice. Instead, realizing their broken connection with God, did you know when you print these papers out that if you don't put them in order, you get really embarrassed? Okay. They feel alone. They feel exposed. That's not how we usually phrase it, is it? How do we usually hear that phrased? Well, they were naked and afraid, does it usually say? They were naked and afraid. Well, they're alone. They're exposed. They hide from him in shame. When stripped of their connection to God, because of their sin, they feel bare and vulnerable. What do? They hid, and then after they hid, what did they do? Good. I can't hear anything. You guys. They cover themselves. Generally speaking, what's the first response when we say, why did they cover themselves? Because they were naked. I'm sorry, we're an adult in here. Who cares? We often will go, no, you have to be covered up because that's civilization. There's only two people there. And they're married. So they cover themselves? The root word, the Proto-Indo-European term, boy, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Go way back as far as you can and then kind of wish back even a little further to the first words of naked is shame. Alone, bare. I would give you that what's happening here is that they are naked in the sense that they don't have a connection with God anymore. They are bare in that they realize for the first time what it means to be not in fellowship with Him. And that scares them. And so what's the first thing that they do? They try to use leaves to cover themselves. Ask you to think about that. It's not fair to throw thought questions at you and then give you 6 seconds to answer and then go from there. And so I'll only give you 4 seconds to answer. Okay? Was there any noticeable change in their attitude toward God when they decided to cover their shame? You see, you think they're covering their shame. Again, I'm saying that they're covering their shame isn't covering their nether parts. I'm saying the covering their shame is they're trying to hide what they have done to God. That's the shame that they feel. But they don't know how to express it. How well does it work? I would give you that it doesn't at all. for the simple reason that they don't even do this correctly. Because in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, in verse 21, what does God have to do for them? God has to show this is how you make clothes. If you're going to wear clothes, this is how they go. It's not this. This is how it's done. This is what's acceptable. Let me come back and again, I'm not asking you to believe all of this right away, but I'm asking you to think about it and see if it kind of fits into a bigger picture as we look at this. Then what was wrong with Eve's, not Adam, but what was wrong with Eve's argument? She took God's ability, this is how I would phrase it, she took God's ability that God had given her to look at things and make decisions, but she applied it to something that she didn't have authority to make a decision to. If she had done it in other instances, it could very well have been a positive thing, and I'm sure it was. We'll see that a little bit later. In other words, see something, hypothesize this, decide that, experiment that. Hey, I don't know. I'm kind of glad I'm hitting my glasses here because I'm blind without them. I'm kind of glad those things have happened, all those science advances. But this wasn't a science advance. This was God said, this is the way it's going to be. This is how it is. And she decided, I can decide that for myself. He patiently asked, where are you? And they react in the same way that we do today. He knows where they are. You've heard that before. He knows where they are. But at the same time, they are looking at it and they're afraid. What's the first thing they do? They blame God. They blame God for making them feel uncomfortable and unsafe. When we start with sin, realize that people are going to blame God. We are going to blame God. The next thing, Adam blames the woman. She did it. By the way, she's your creation, God, and you did this to me. She had given him the fruit. Eve blames the serpent who deceived her. Of all those explanations, there's one that's missing. Which one is missing? I did it. I was wrong. There's nothing self involved there. There's consequences. Each depending upon only their wisdom in making their decision to eat. The results are with us today. In Genesis, the 3rd chapter and verse 16, Eve, who first had chosen to be deceived and then instructed Adam to eat, would find the results painful. I don't expect you to give me some feedback right away on this, but again, if you find that there's holes in what I'm saying, or if I'm off, or if you just want to discuss it, please let me know later on. We don't have to do it right away. I want you to think about it, and if we get involved in something later, that's okay. But I'm going to be talking about some things that probably you probably will disagree with, and that's fine. First of all, the honor, and I'm emphasizing that term that God gave Eve, the honor in her role to multiply the earth would now be tarnished by physical pain during childbirth. This is a penalty that's involved and going to be involved not only with Eve, but every other woman. The close connection with her husband, the two becoming one flesh, would now be challenged. Despite God's placing man as the head of the family, her belief in her ability to control the relationship would become commonplace. The clashes resulting would be a cause, not the only, but a cause of the dislike, rivalry, and enmity present in many marriages up to today. Not finished yet. I know some of you are going, what about Adam? Adam, who had understood what God desired, chose instead to remain silent. In Genesis 3:17 and 18, his refusal to fulfill his role as head of the family and the men who would follow his example by not doing that would bring harm to countless families. the honor given to him through managing the world around him would be dim forever. Now he would face a combative relationship with the environment. This earth, which was good in God's sight at creation, would be cursed with thorns and thistles, damaged beyond repair, making man's work attending it backbreaking and sweat-filled. Sin caused the earth to be, what word should I use there? I wouldn't say cursed, but I also want to say damaged. Boy, when the words go, they go. God has created man from the dust of the earth and labeled them as something very good in his sight. Now humanity would always feel the result of their choice. In Genesis 3:17-18, all men and women throughout their lives would struggle to have the earth sustain them with food and shelter. This is the way it's going to be from now on. Can I stop for just a second? Why do we always assume, I don't know if we always do, that must be the mouse I have in my pocket. Why do we always assume that this takes place a long time after they've been there for a long time? How do we know this doesn't take place the second day? We really don't know. But the reason I bring that up is we kind of think, oh, well, there was a period of perfection. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. This actually is the normal for us. And here's where you probably will think, go ahead. Okay, that's a possibility. There are things that we could discuss on that one, but I don't want to. I want to stay on the straight and narrow. Is that one okay? But it's something to think about. This probably will get you going on what I'm getting at. This is when people die. This is when death comes into the world. Then at the end of their time on this earth, instead of mortals putting on immortality, they would lose whatever glory remained in their physical body as it faded into dust. You say, give me a scripture that proves that. I have to build something. I have to look at what Jesus does in the New Testament. And what does he say about the resurrection? What are we hoping for? We're hoping that there will be a time when there will be no death. Well, then, people live forever then. No, they lived in physical bodies. And they were told to do what? To fill up the earth. If they never died, well, you get an idea of numbers. Then what happened? What I seem to think here, or what I understand, is this is what was planned. What was planned is we live out our life on this earth worshiping God and following him, and this was God's plan. And then at the end of our days here, we are changed into that immortal being, just as Jesus will when he brings back and does it at the last day. That was the norm. What happens is something is broken instead, and this idea of going back to the earth. You notice it says going back to dust. It doesn't say you're ending of everything. It's talking about your physical body as it fades into dust. And that gets me into death. If you look in Romans 7th chapter, there's 4 different, death is used and dying are used in 4 different ways. I'm not going to go over this a whole lot. I'd like you to study it out later. But let me just kind of go over them very quickly. First of all, in verses 2 and 3, Paul explains about physical death. And he uses the husband and wife. When the husband dies whichever one died, I can't remember up there. Okay, when the husband dies, then the wife is no longer married. So physical death. Sometimes when they say death, they're talking physical death. In number 2, he talks about how death is sometimes outside the control of specific laws. That's a fancy way of saying it. All I can think of is this. The people get mad, the employee gets mad at the employer, or the son gets mad at the father and yells at him, "You're dead to me." Well, what does that mean? It means you don't have no authority over me. So being dead means you're outside control. Number 3, this idea that dead is inactive whenever a law doesn't exist. If there is no law, well then it's inactive. It's almost kind of, you have to play with that one a bit and look in verse 8. And finally, Paul says that sin is taking advantage of the existence of law and deceiving him into thinking he can survive without God. Isn't that what Eve was doing? His choice then kills him by separating him from God. And that's in verses 9 through 11. The reason I'm bringing that up is that last one is the one I'm saying that I believe that Adam and Eve are feeling. Their feeling of isolation and dishonor results in spiritual death. While they did not physically die at the moment of their sin, their unique relationship with God did. It's like in Luke, the 15th chapter. Remember the prodigal son? The father sees him at the end, and what does he say? "For this my son was dead and is alive again." He was in isolation. He was in dishonor. Now he's back again. That's how they feel. So did Adam die the moment, and Eve died the moment they partook of that fruit? Yes. In the sense that it separates them from God. Was it the physical action of the munching on whatever they ate? It was the mindset behind it that caused it. Oh, I was checking. No, what's this? I'm defining the score.
Is that also like the second death and like things like that? Is that kind of terminology potentially included in stuff like that?
I think as we see through this, yeah, and it helps tie this stuff together and make it a little bit more sense, to me at least. Every human from the time of creation until now is a blend of physical body and soul. I think we'd agree with that. The body is made up of material elements. The soul is breathed by God, one of which has the possibility of aging. The other is eternal. By reassigning death as a punishment for sin, God made clear how seriously he viewed sin. And what I'm getting at again is, if you remember, the title of the class is "The Good Man Had to Die, the Consequences of Sin." It's not just because you did something. It's because from the very beginning, what it did was disrupt all of creation. All of creation. So, death becomes both a consequence of sin and a source of fear. People are afraid of death. Boy, yeah. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned. It's fear. Because when they're on death's door, or they feel they're going to die, when we feel that we're going to die, our life feels beyond our control. Fear, because in Paul's words in Romans, the 1st chapter and verse 32, though they know God's righteous decree that these who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew what they were encouraging was wrong. They did it anyway, and now at the moment, right before they die, there's fear. Fear due to realizing our belief about controlling our destiny, we can control our own destiny, is built upon a lie. What does Jesus say about Satan in John 8:44? He was a murderer from the beginning, and he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Who did he murder? Adam and Eve. But who else did he murder? Every person. Everyone. Very good, Dave. Thanks. Every one of us. He murdered you. If you're an adult and know right and wrong, he murdered you. Fear, because our admitting that our separation from God would become permanent at the moment of physical death. What do they say about, I don't know if this is true or not, those of you that have been in the military or know this better than I, they say there's no atheists in foxholes, that at the moment when you think that you're going to die, people, quote, get religious, I guess. They believe in God. So what comes out of Adam and Eve? Death. For all of us. For those who are dying as Christians, have you known some that do? And what has been the attitude? Sometimes a sense of relief, sometimes a sense of peace, calm. For those who are extremely evil and have made up their mind that there is no God, can death be a sense of calmness and peace? Yes, it can. They're wrong, but it can. Because when you can be so deluded, sin, that's another thing that we're going to see, sin can control your mind to such a degree that you have no idea of what's right. In Matthew the 13th chapter, just going to do this very quickly, and this is kind of an introduction for when we do this after our break. Next week it will be a sermon. In Matthew the 13th chapter, we have this parable where Jesus rows out into the lake, and there's people all around. They come from all over the place. And everybody's going, this is a crowd. And he gets up and he talks about soil and seed. And then he rows off. And the crowd's kind of going, huh? And his apostles, those that will become his apostles, look and also say, why are you doing this? Afterward, the apostles asked Jesus about the parable. He replied that he'd been purposely unclear, wanting to see who would be interested enough to seek him out to find out more. And here's one of those terms, that Bible terms, that unless you explain it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He who has ears, let him hear. Well, in this case, what is he saying? You know something, if you have the ability, you're going to have to use it. It's not just going to come to you. You're going to have to use it. You need to look at the whole picture. And that same kind of reasoning, I think, is necessary when we define sin. You know, some of us know already that the Hebrew word for sin means trespassing or breaking. The Greek word means missing the mark. So is it reasonable then to define sin as our failure to live up to God's standards? I think that's it partly. Is that all there is, though? Did Jesus give up being God, live here on earth, suffer, and die here because we broke a rule? Because we missed the bullseye once? Think about missing the mark. Well, I didn't hit the bullseye, but I hit the edge of the bullseye. Teacher's great on a curve. God, why can't you? I knew I'd get a snicker out of that. Go ahead, Ian.
One of the ideas that I've been kicking around and kind of investigating is the idea of why does God send people to hell? And one of the answers I've heard recently was God doesn't send anybody to hell. You've chosen to have it your own way, to live outside of what God wants for you, to say, no thanks, God, I don't want what you have for me. And therefore he allows you, because you have free will, to go your own way. Your own way that you've now chosen is to be without God. Therefore you're in a dominion without God, also
Oh, I appreciate that. Yes, thank you. And it kind of looks here, and it kind of leads me to this next thing. When we start, the problem with kind of coming along this line of reasoning is we get to this. Okay, deciding that some sins are worse than others. And let's face it, most of us have an idea that some sins are worse than others. I mean, don't we really, when you think about it? I don't even have to say some that are just atrocious, horrible, that make us sick to our stomach. And then I can say some that will go, oh yeah, that's bad, but it's not like these. Well, when we start doing that idea of barely missing the bullseye, we get the idea of serious sins and little sins, or white sins, or whatever you want to call them. But then look at what history has done. Some may be safely overlooked, while others can't. The guy that you know that gets high in his house, and you know he's taking drugs, but he's not bothering you and he's sober when he's in here. It's bad. You want to talk to him, but it's not like the guy, you fill in, the other guy, you fill in the blank that's horrible. I don't want to. I mean, isn't that true? That's kind of how we look at that. And yet, man's history has been what? Serious sins one generation become little sins in the next generation, and 2 generations down, they're acceptable behavior. And you say, well, we're seeing that today. Well, we are, but guess what? We see it every generation for however many years we've done. So defining sin only as breaking a particular rule of law is seeing only part of the picture. It's only part of the elephant. Sin is the individual transgression of God's law. It's also the breaking, though, of a relationship. That connection is called a covenant in the Bible. A covenant is not a contract. It is not a legal document. A biblical covenant is much more, and it takes a long time to discuss it, and I don't really want to get into that. I just want to bring this up, that God called upon man to keep his laws. That was part of the covenant. Laws are God's way to protect man. Now let's go back to Eve. And the serpent says, you can't eat of that tree? Oh no, if I eat of that one, he'll kill me. Instead of, I can eat of everything else. You can't keep this law? But no, look at what other freedom I have, though. Do you see the difference in attitude and mindset? Laws are God's way to protect man, or do you look at laws as a way that if you step on them, you will die? Respecting them also allows man to demonstrate his love for him and others in that relationship. Then why do I follow the laws? Because I love God. And here's our 5-letter word. Here's our 5-letter word. I trust him. Did Eve trust God? No. No, the bottom line is, no, she couldn't have. If she had trusted him, she would have followed what he said. Let's stop there, and in a couple of weeks, we'll see what else I can come up with. Thank you so much.